Hello, everyone. My name is Liam, and your host here at Restaking, where it's our job to bring you everything you need to know that's happening in the restaking space. And joining me is my co-host Ethan. Ethan, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Yeah, what's up, guys? Hi.
And today we're really excited to welcome Felix Lutch. Hopefully, I didn't butcher the name too much. To restaking. Felix is the head of ecosystem at Symbiotic, a restaking protocol, and a venture partner at Rakitis, and which is a crypto infrastructure venture fund. He is also the co-host at a podcast called Epicenter, and you can find Felix on X via or at Felix LTS, Felix LTS. That's how you spell it. And yeah, let's jump right into it. Felix, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Liam. Thanks for the awesome intro and hi, Ethan. Good to see you here. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, talk about restaking, talk about Symbiotic. I glad to be on the other side of the microphone, basically. uh, as in, like, yeah, sometimes I don't do as many like Epicenter podcast interviews anymore right now because of sort of the role and what I do at Symbiotic and kind of the time commitment there. But yeah, always very interested to talk to folks about what we're doing and
Perfect. Yeah. Actually, my first question is gonna might catch you off guard a little bit. I while I was kind of like doing a little bit of research about you, I actually found out that you have a fashion label called
right.
Pastel Apparel. Any thoughts about just kind of expanding into the NFT space at all among your many titles and interests?
Yeah, that was like something I did like when I had a bit of a break. I'm in crypto for 5 years now. I worked at Course One
Mm-hmm.
before, which is like a node operator in the staking space. I've been quite deep in staking and crypto infrastructure for a while, and I
Mm-hmm.
sort of took a bit of a break, wanted to do something different and like physical and on the ground. So I started like a brand with a friend here in Portugal where I'm based. We did actually also have some ideas for NFTs, and there are some around. There is like a whole concept about how we would integrate it, but currently we still do have like some designs. I also made like a bunch of designs for crypto companies, including Symbiotic. So if you're lucky enough and you got the first Symbiotic merge piece last year in DevCon, then that's a pastel design. If you look at your in the back of the
That's super cool.
label, you'll see that.
That's super
Maybe
cool. That's super
restaking
cool.
merge one day.
Maybe one day. uh, cool. Yeah. And uh, so before we kind of get into the nitty gritties of sort of Symbiotic and your perspective of the industry, can you sort of start by, I guess a good place to start is really just kind of like an overview of Symbiotic itself. Most of our audiences are probably already very familiar with restaking the concept, but I think a great question or great entry point for us is what do you think, is symbiotic? What do you think symbiotic means to you, and how symbiotic sort of sets apart from the rest of the restaking protocols?
Yeah, for sure. I think, Symbiotic basically is a like flexible framework to build staking or restaking or basically shared security in
Mm-hmm.
the crypto space being designed in a very modular and minimal way to basically be as non-intrusive to the teams integrating the staking primitives and to be as like sort of expressive as possible for them without like kind of constraining them into certain design choices that they might not want to make or have to make. So that builds on like a few like experience or years of experience in security auditing, in observing other shared security platforms, and sort of, I guess, in general, crypto architecture and crypto smart contract design, and also DeFi, where in the way how we realize that vision for the symbiotic protocol. So in practice, that means, there's a very key design setup that essentially allows the integrators of Symbiotic to build their own security mechanism, meaning they can choose like which assets they want to use as collateral. They can choose like sort of how slashing is implemented. They can choose a bunch of things, how they select operators. And Symbiotic basically just facilitates that, helps them bootstrap the system fast and with existing liquidity from the EVM or Ethereum specifically right now, but it's actually like kind of chain agnostic. So that's what it is, and basically allowing these parties in the shared security ecosystem to form agreements with each other. So like node operators can decide if they want to opt into networks. Capital providers can decide if they want to delegate their funds on these networks, and the networks themselves can kind of design their systems in ways that maybe previously would have required a lot of time for them and maybe weren't even possible, sort of making use of capital efficiency of restaking by like sharing collateral between multiple of these networks. That's what we call the shared security networks or AVSs or many names have been given to these parachains. Who knows?
Absolutely, absolutely. What do you say? Obviously, um, right now the biggest competitor, if I should say, for Symbiotic is perhaps EigenLayer, and being the sort of the main mind share holder of restaking, and Symbiotic being the later comer. Um, what do you think is the key strategy that sets Symbiotic apart from EigenLayer, right? I think that's kind of like a very common question everyone in the community is asking and wondering. Um, being very similar in terms of the ecosystem you guys are situated in. There are obviously other restaking protocol in Solana, in Bitcoin, even the Symbiotic, kind of chooses to stay within the Ethereum. What areas do you think will sort of uh, after I guess mainnet sets Symbiotic apart from the rest of the competition out there?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. I think overall, right, that's true. Like obviously Aglair has like paved the way a lot for shared security and for bringing like sort of these concepts, especially into the Ethereum sort of space where like kind of app chains or these kind of custom environments haven't really been such a big thing. I guess there's been roll-ups, which are kind of like very focused on most of the time providing the exact same abilities than like the Ethereum, just like for scaling. But like some of the concepts in shared security go back also to Cosmos, merge mining, Polkadot. So we see us as like sort of a one in the field of many of these, and in many ways also like extension of like ideas of sharding and whatnot. But how it sets apart, I think definitely we want it to be a core primitive on Ethereum where sort of all the innovative activity is happening, where there is a lot of liquidity, where there is a lot of DeFi, where there are multiple assets actually that can be restaked. So I think one of the core um, insights for Symbiotic is that, it shouldn't be limited just to one specific asset. So it's not just about like extending necessarily the ETH validator set or the powers that ETH validators do, even though that's a big part, but it can also be like, any sort of ERC20 asset. So it could have stablecoin restaking, you can have Bitcoin restaking, governance tokens of particular projects, RWA tokens, NFTs, whatever really the project wants to use as collateral or feels like is adequate collateral to
Mm-hmm.
secure whatever function they serve. We saw as like something that should be usable. And then I think the other part is like just the core thinking about how do you actually achieve slashing in a restaking system and sort of maintain the flexibility that kind of restaking has over previous shared security attempts. I think like previous shared security attempts are sort of like more okay, we were using like the entire set always, or we just have operators around like more instances of software. where staking has that nice optionality that you can kind of opt into whatever you like, more or less. And that led us to ultimately like kind of the symbiotic design and the vault system that we have that I'm happy to like dive a bit more into and sort of
Hmm.
from first principles understanding how one could do slashing in that sense and then kind of just building that system out with the experience that we have and bringing that to market and so far that's what we've been doing and now it's live on mainnet and but there's still jobs not finished so there's still
For
like a
sure.
lot to be done there and I'm happy to dive into like particulars.
Yeah, for sure. I think you picked on. There are several things that I want to dive deeper in today's chat. I think you talked about sort of specifics of evolution of sort of our industry. That's kind of like first and foremost where we're coming from. Our industry kind of building on top of the layer one architecture and gradually realizing the caviar of or specific niches that these layer ones are not able to accomplish and sort of growing into different stages of sort of multi-chain or app chain sort of ecosystems, Cosmos, Polkadot, and whatnot. And then now, sort of, we're in a brand new world with we've always kind of like in our restaking newsletter, we always try to sort of discuss this idea of nowadays apps are, the backends are essentially they don't look alike at all, right? Obviously, you still have the layer ones, but you also have all kinds of different like keeper networks. You have ZK networks. You have rollups that are utilizing different sort of sequencers, and you have all kinds of API queries across the different places. So I think what you mentioned, Felix, the flexibility is really key here. So that's kind of like the first trend that you mentioned. And the second thing that I actually want to ask right after this is the DeFi, right? Because from our perspective, or at least from my personal perspective, Symbiotic sort of coming out of the stealth, so to speak, has placed a very strong focus on DeFi and announced a very sort of early partnership with Mello, right? Which is something that is very distinct from EigenLayer. Even for today, EigenLayer sort of distanced itself from a lot of the LRTs or a lot of the DeFi activities, building on top of the restaking sort of infrastructure. But Symbiotic seems to take a drastic stance on that front and openly embraced DeFi. What are some of the
Mhm.
key insights, you kind of drives Symbiotic to that decision and to that approach, and what's kind of like influenced the decision at the point you mentioned, for you guys, for Symbiotic, accepting more ERC20 tokens has always been a big important sort of feature for all of these networks. How is that kind of mixed into the whole picture?
Yeah, yeah, very interesting question or like framing. I think we realize that restaking is a financial product, I guess, and it's part of the
Mm.
DeFi ecosystem at large. Actually, staking is already. I think for a while there was proof of stake, which sort of lived in isolation because actually the DeFi ecosystem emerged on Ethereum, where there was only proof of work. So like the two didn't really mix that much because like the proof of stake chains were kind of ghost chains where nothing was happening. But then, with Lido and like sort of the emergence of proof of stake on Ethereum, a lot's changed and like STETH became pretty much the base collateral of a lot of things um, in Ethereum DeFi and till this day is. And restaking kind of takes that like level up with including like more differentiated strategies, sorry, for like liquid restaking tokens that can delegate their stake across multiple networks, right? And like sort of have like different risk profiles to what LSTs have. And I think we did realize that we don't want to take a strong stance of, how these will look, but basically that these parties will emerge that will manage these strategies and these vaults, and they will essentially issue assets. If they want to, they might not want to issue assets. So basically, our vault architecture allows you to like not tokenize the vault or tokenize it, and then like players like Mello were key early on to also include in the future, I guess, additional other DeFi integrations that you might want to do with your liquid staking token. So let's say you want to like loop it and you want to borrow against the liquid staking token. That's also not something that we would want to have in the core protocol. The core protocol for Symbiotic focuses more to like enable networks to spin up and to create their security mechanisms. So that these parties are there and they have a space and that we're not competing with them and that they can kind of build up their own ecosystem, their own differentiation was very important to us. And I think it still is, right? And we're seeing that shape up. I do think we see as like a DeFi thing. Of course, there's like also risks in restaking with how this sort of DeFi activity can trickle down to kind of the networks and the security that they take. So there is a lot of like onus or like thought that networks have to put into like in terms of where they get their stake from and who they're sharing the collateral with. These are all kind of parameters in the symbiotic system that you have to like consciously choose. And because it's not a like one size fits all system, but rather like an emergent like marketplace where different restaking structures can exist, like you can have very isolated buckets of risk where there's basically no restaking, but you can also have like a system that shares collateral with a lot of other networks, and then you're sort of need a lot of like good work on risk curation to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to some sort of like tail risk or catastrophic events, and the network might be not as secure as you thought it was. So yeah, there's a lot to dive in there, but I think
For
that's
sure,
definitely we see
absolutely.
that DeFi is like a key component of the entire market, right? And
Yeah, for sure.
generally, from experience, I think it shows that if you try to constrain sort of the DeFi environment, it'll like find a way still, and then probably you have less control. So you should like design with the DeFi ecosystem in mind
Hmm.
if you're building in crypto generally.
Yeah, I would love to kind of sort of pick your brain on your personal thoughts, or in terms of obviously Symbiotic is still at its core a very sort of infrastructure heavy protocol, right? And it involves all of the things from helping projects to design, the slashing, the rewards, and all that. But personally speaking, what are do you think is going to happen for DeFi building on top of Symbiotic and the whole sort of restaking infrastructure that's building on top?
Yeah, I think actually do think that like the symbiotic vault architecture and sort of the core primitive that we deliver in terms of like slashing and um, like being able to provide commitments or economic commitments to sort of certain on-chain actions, they actually tie in well to the DeFi ecosystem, can actually even be leveraged by DeFi protocols directly that might not necessarily be take the form of a proof of stake network that just does like validate certain transactions, but for example, could be like insurance protocols or within certain other DeFi features. So I think like we'll see like something emerging there where basically use cases within restaking itself are actually DeFi products. And then I think also on top of these LRTs and like tokenized restaking positions, there is
Hmm.
another like layer of structured products that can be built
For sure.
to I don't know, hedge out certain price risks or all these kinds of things.
Yeah, because I think
Put
one thing that I was thinking about personally is, obviously the initial premise for, or I think personally I struggle on this a little bit, is that, the initial premise or the majority or the major reason why the market is so hyped up about restaking initially is the fact that there are a huge amount of ETH basically dormant and seeking yield, while sort of traditionally the only thing they can do is to potentially provide LPs and whatnot. So it's with very much intra or intra ecosystem, right? So it's kind of like internal to the Ethereum ecosystem itself, and restaking really provides a sort of an outlet to have these to allow the blue chip assets such as ETH to get access to a the yield outside of the ecosystem itself, but at the same time also bounded to Ethereum's future, right? I think that's kind of like a that narrative or that position immediately clicked for many people out there, including myself. And Felix, you mentioned that previously. The what you guys want to do is also to include other sort of type of assets, whether it's variety of different ERC20 tokens, or even project their own sort of native tokens into the restaking. How do you think that will play out in terms of the risks and in terms of opportunity here? Because obviously, we already have liquid staking in many instances for sort of networks in Cosmos, right? And one of the major worry or oftentimes what people do is they don't like to hold these project token because these projects are often new, and there are price movement are often very very large, and it's high volatility. How is sort of your perspective in terms of restaking's relationship with all of these, and Symbiotic's relationship to essentially being the arbitrator or arbiter in the middle, to orchestrate the relationships?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Symbiotic is the arbitrator, but rather because it's like kind of a permissionless protocol and you can
Mm-hmm.
do whatever. Like we don't, or like the protocol doesn't take any like opinionated
Yeah, for sure.
choice there, which sort of the entire point of it. But I guess in terms of what you're asking, I think one of the core insights for me is that while restaking is great and like many people sort of got the concept and like on a high level makes sense to try and use ETH when you can, but like oftentimes many of the projects actually have their own tokens, or they are trying to
Mm-hmm.
drive value to their token or utility to their token, because it's already pretty hard to build like a token model, and like staking is sort of one of the core um, utilities that we have found in crypto for the token to become like a
Absolutely.
token sink almost, or like to like provide security to the network. And so given that, like projects will definitely want to use their own token when they can. Plus, but they still might want to use ETH maybe in the beginning phases when they get started, or maybe as a like sort of complementary thing to their own security, or even other assets where they have like economic relationships with different protocols that they might want to like take into consideration to also stake with their network. So, for example, I guess that goes back to something that Sunny has always talked about with mesh security in the Cosmos, where it's like a NATO-like arrangement where like
Mm-hmm.
people come together and provide security to each other. Like I give you some of my security, you give me mine, and together we're stronger. That I also still find very interesting. And then um, of course you might also want to use stable coins because just they're like very accessible, they have like a wide user base, and they're also like price stable, right? So in that sense you will have like a predictable security, and you can kind of calculate what you want to pay for that. So there's really like no one size fits all, and like
Mm-hmm.
um many networks might want to structure this in a different way and like incentivize in a different way. And I think really what Symbiotic tries to do is like kind of allow for that experimentation and
Mm-hmm.
to see what comes out of it, and just to be like that framework that instead of like when I want to do some design like this, I have to, I don't know, use my restaking platform for the ETH staking and then have my own native staking on some other
Mm-hmm.
thing. Just kind of combine that in the same system. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
I really like the concept of sort of taking the approach, or taking the more chilled approach of treating things like experiments, because I think that's often not what emphasized by our industry, right? It's kind of like our industry has always been following a very rigorous step-by-step process where you go into testnet, then you go into mainnet, and then you're kind of like set, right, set in stone. But oftentimes these projects are facing is they're not 100% clear of their sort of the network architecture at all, right? Even in the very very much in the beginning, but also along the process, we have to allow experimentation, and we have to allow sort of these type of maneuverability within the network itself, so that you can experiment different parameters, to try different things, and maybe even to break some things. I think that's a really good insights that's coming from Symbiotic and you guys. That's essentially allowing for that type of change to happen, or that type of flexibility to happen within the the projects or the networks itself, right? And coming from the other side, right? I think over the past few weeks, both Ethan and I, and the whole sort of restaking team here, we've kind of went down into a little bit of the sort of the rabbit hole, and trying to think about, obviously initially we have a huge hype cycle for restaking, right? And everyone is super excited about restaking. Everyone is, so many restaking related LRTs are popping up, right? And now sort of we are kind of in the slow decline of the hype cycle, so to speak. And we believe that one of the major reason is because a lot of the projects or a lot of the networks are not too sure about the rewards, right? They're not too sure about how rewards are being distributed, or to put it in another perspective, the key players within restaking, the operators, the networks, and the restakers, the economic loop hasn't been closed, right? Obviously, we have the Symbiotic right now allows for the restaking or the inflow of the capital, but as far as I know, like out of the current 14 projects or 14 networks that's live on mainnet on Symbiotic, I haven't seen anything, any rewards being released. What are some of the thinking behind sort of pushing projects or guiding the networks uh, to release sort of or to orchestrate the appropriate release of rewards, or um, what are some challenges in this?
Yeah, I think in our case, it's actually just like sort of a matter of rollout sequence of the network. So
Mm-hmm.
there are some teams that basically don't have a token yet, which is kind of common in a restaking system, I would say, or as a network, right? You actually kind of don't want to issue your token too early,
Mm-hmm.
as you're just kind of bootstrapping. And like you also won't have fees at the start, right? Like pretty much
Mm-hmm.
that's clear because you're also bootstrapping your network, right? So either you stay pretty centralized, but okay, if your goal is to be a decentralized network, you maybe want to um, get started on that early to like set the precedent, to get the right folks involved, and to test your system. So we have a lot of folks that will issue points on their end. So basically, like um, rewarding people in that way early on before they have a token. And there is like tools we provide for both things, right? For like token incentives, we have a template contract that networks can use to pay out rewards in real tokens, but there's also basically points API to track that what the contributions have been in terms of stake and how you can like issue those points. And we provide a little bit of examples there. Um, and there's going to be like probably when this airs, we'll have the first two, three of these 40 networks that have points live, and all of them are either planning some form of point rewards or real token rewards if they have assets in the coming months. And yeah, I guess that's kind of there. I do think that, being that now slashing is possible for us also, or available, so you actually can pay for real security that slashable. That might also mean, people will be willing to pay for that. There's been a big argument from some ABSs that we spoke to in also the Angler ecosystem, that they were like, hey, okay, but actually we're not getting security, so what are we actually paying for? Right? That doesn't really go anymore at that point now for us. I mean, still you will have a lot of networks that try to like get around that in a way, but the reality is, yeah, you'll have to pay for your stakers, right? And the capital and the node operators still, obviously the promise of restaking still stands, that this security might be cheaper if it's actually restaked with other networks. And just in terms of like pure cost of capital, of course, the node operators still need to run infrastructure. You also need to reward them somehow. Um, we're essentially just trying to make it as streamlined and easy as possible also for operators to,
Hmm.
because it's the same framework, right? It's the same way to opt into any network. They might like use different sidecar stacks or different like chain stacks, and so the operators need to run different infrastructure, but it's still more streamlined than if it were like completely new chain.
Hmm.
And also there are certain, you can reutilize the same infrastructure as an operator and receive stake from different vaults in Symbiotic. So basically, you don't need to like run a new instance of a node for every partner that you have, which also like kind of saves on pure infrastructure costs. So there are like a few factors. Like basically, we try to optimize as much as possible the to put down the cost, but it still stands that, if you're a network and you want to pay for decentralization, if you want to have decentralization, you're gonna have to pay for it. Decentralization is suboptimal. I'm quoting Misha here. It's you're gonna have to pay for that, right? Like it's just inevitable, right? There's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
magic wand, but you can do things to make it more optimized, and I guess
Hmm.
we're aiming to leverage all of these in protocol tools, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And since Symbiotic just recently released the mainnet, you mentioned there are obviously, I think the whole restaking industry is still at the very nascent stage, right, at the moment. And
Yeah.
what are some of the sort of the big major milestones that are on Symbiotic's roadmap?
Yeah, so I mean, this one was like a huge one, of course, as you might imagine. It's actually like the feature complete V1, let's call it, Symbiotic V1.
Hmm.
Of course, there's still other things that we're building in terms of like core protocol. We're like thinking about in terms of like how can we achieve better cross-chain or multi-chain sort of setup, maybe even, or how can vaults be more um, expressive, have more features, be more useful. But a lot of the work currently goes into like sort of the auxiliary systems, like SDKs to support network builders to make it easier to deploy. That's partially from us, but also like kind of through partners like Tansi, for example, that just help
Hmm.
you deploy like a network quickly. But still because it's so flexible, there's just a lot of choices that you have to make, and some of them are still pretty require you to deeply understand it. And so I think we're basically like working on tools to make some of these more streamlined.
Hmm.
Um, that's a big one. Um, yeah, basically, I think those are like full network rollouts, right? I mentioned like there is a lot of things, and we're also encouraging that in networks to have like a sort of streamed, sort of phased, let's call it, rollout, where you first go to like a sort of maybe even pre-deposit phase, then you launch without slashing, and then you sort of turn on slashing. It's something that actually has been championed already in the Cosmos ecosystem, for example, with like decentralized Genesis and like sort of the steps that you go through as a
Hmm.
mature network. And we see a lot of teams making use of that, and maybe not having like full slashing capabilities at the start, either because they haven't developed it yet or because they want
Hmm.
to make sure that everything works.
Hmm.
So I think, the next milestones are also include like fully slashable real capital at risk networks.
Hmm.
There are like one, two of those right now already. Um, but even in those, like there are some safeguards still. So I think,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, that will be
I think that would be
interesting.
really interesting because previously I was saying half jokingly actually in our newsletter that I think for restaking will be 100 times better if we force everyone to launch rewards and plus have slashing enabled to be able to be on the mainnet. I think since with the like you said, Felix, with slashing, there comes it signals kind of like a certain level of maturity for networks, right? In terms of its design, in terms of its offering of the features, and in terms of sort of the completeness of the package, or that includes the network, the product, the business side, and everything. And then if we have the rewards, that will be sort of really complete the cycle where the supply and demand side kind of like finally meets each other, right? And I really like the concept of you guys thinking about sort of fostering a phased plan for these networks. I think from the experiences, basically taking a look at what EigenLayer has been done in early phases, they've been also doing a lot of the SDKs or these sort of software development kits or templates or tooling for these networks to build up. But I think one common theme that I've witnessed across the board, not only even in EigenLayer, but also in sort of certainly in other network restaking protocols, Jito, for example, uh, these networks don't really have a sort of a roadmap or a cookbook for sort of which phase I should sort of complete which target, and these confusion oftentimes leads to uh, sort of the delay of these sort of key feature unlocks, right? And I think that would be tremendously beneficial, and we'll certainly sort of put more eyes on sort of any news from Symbiotic on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
you're in that cycle of crypto. Some people also want to market themselves as like
Mm-hmm.
everything's ready already, right? Like, and
Yeah.
maybe it's not. And I think that's actually fair. You gotta be like honest about that too. And um, yeah, so I think that's natural that it takes time. It would be weird, like I guess Rome wasn't built in a day type of quote. Um, um, but yeah, I think, so just trying to, it's kind of part of our strategy to remove the friction to make it as easy as possible to bootstrap a network. And I think realizing those like sort of stages in the network lifecycle are quite important for builders that actually seriously want to build a network, because you will have to go through that. So like we want to assist in that, and it's already hard. It's still going to be hard. So
Yeah, for sure. I think
yeah.
for it's great that we have all kinds of different tooling for layer one, and we're essentially building everything from ground up just to set things up again for all of these sort of so to speak off-chain networks or middlewares that are supporting our ecosystem. I've been talking a lot. Ethan, do you have any questions that you would love to ask Felix about?
Yeah. I see the time, but I think it would be a good point to kind of wrap up on. Like we've talked a lot about the short term and like the recent term, like all the achievements that have been made thus far, but restaking and these networks are products that take long time to truly show their value prop. So I'm wondering in the long run how you're thinking about how the restaking game will play out. Like specifically, um, what what would make a network choose one restaking platform for security over another? Will networks go to both? Will it be like just off the top of my head? I'm kind of considering maybe it's a race to the bottom in terms of cost. Like okay, the cheapest security will get the most networks. Um, and like obviously these platforms you guys need networks for yield for like they're your customer, right? Or so aside from cost, is like social layer going to play a factor, like ancillary services, rolling out the red carpet, DevRel, um, like brokering legal agreements between the LRTs on one platform and the networks on one platform. Does a social factor come into play? Um, so I'm just broadly considering what how the end game will shape out in terms of from a network perspective, and I want to specifically highlight like Eigenlayer recently pivoted from having a pooled security model to like a more constrained model where um, stake can be slashed only by one network or one AVS in Eigenlayer's case. But Symbiotic is like completely, it's more expressive. You guys let the vault kind of have a trade-off between capital efficiency and um, decentralization and security. So it's up to the network to say, okay, do I want to take security from this vault? This vault is securing X number of other networks, and these other networks have these slashing conditions. So yes, I guess long story short, how does the end game play out, and how important is this like pooled security feature? Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think like in many products, there, I guess a lot of like these factors do play some role, right? Like um, I think especially in the early stages, it helps if there's like a lot of auxiliary features that we help with, or like even with iGlayer, I guess a lot of the teams go with it initially with because of the exposure and sort of the being part of the iGlayer ecosystem, and maybe receiving support from them, right? Those are all like legit things, but I guess in the long run, I do think that um really the features and the cost will matter. And I think, why we still have the restaking functionality, or think it's a big factor, is because that basically would drive down the cost, in theory, and I guess also in practice. Like, so that should create like sort of these network effects around, now you have many networks potentially sharing the same security. Obviously it's going to be cheaper, so like if you also come in and you're like borrowing security from there, you'll get the better price, and you'll go with that. And yeah, so I do think that like that sort of matters, like the scalability of it, and it's like any other business in that sense. But still, all these other factors will matter, and maybe like someone will just choose it because they have a better relationship with some of the people on there. I don't know, like some people go with AWS over Google Cloud for some reasons like that, right? Like
yeah,
there's all these things that probably shouldn't be like completely disregarded. But I do think that the core lies in this sort of capital efficiency of over another, for now at least. Maybe there's something else that will emerge still.
yeah. I think Liam and I are both like product enjoyers, and like I like this answer. Like, you build the 10x feature, and in the long run, it will win. Like, yeah, I like this philosophy, and um, we kind of we glossed over it, but composability, capital efficiency, and a lower cost is great, but like at what trade-off? Like I'm just curious to see. Like now
Right.
we have kind of two experiments running in parallel. We have like a limited, kind of like neutered pooled security model, and then we have a kind of like fully free one, and we can see the how they develop in parallel, and like cascading slashing versus like maybe like too expensive security. These would be some trade-offs, but yeah,
Yeah.
excited
I will say that like you can still just build a like unique stake, and you can just take stake from one vault and just
for sure.
make it like a very secure network on Symbiotic. You don't need to be exposed to these experiments or risks from other networks if you don't want to, which it's sort of like an opt-in thing. And that, yeah, essentially, I guess, covers that ground too. But yeah, I think ultimately it's still a lot about, I guess, how easy is everything to use, and like many other factors. Yeah,
Yeah.
that
I guess my last question, I'm conscious at the time, is like, uh, you've been doing like great work growing the ecosystem at Symbiotic. I saw like you guys published recent blog posts, all the different networks and non-network kind of participants in your ecosystem. Any services or networks you're excited about that you just want to like quickly shill or like let our community know about? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, please check out the ones that are there. Like they're all great. I think what they're all like, many of them are kind of like common infrastructure, and that's maybe also the reality of restaking. We're in some ways like something's already been there in crypto. Like I mean, crypto, like some of the things that work, they have been identified at this point. We're kind of not reinventing everything all the time. There are some new things like prover networks like Calypso, which is interesting. So like kind of just a decentralized network to generate proofs and to hold like the ones that create the proofs accountable for their quality of service, basically. So that's kind of like a new thing because like ZK has become a bigger thing. there's also just Oracle, right? Like Keeper network, pre-confirmations. I mean, yeah, I guess so some things evolve a bit, become more optimized. Um, Still makes them very exciting. I think there's also what I guess, then excited about is, how these financial new primitives of staking, like multi-asset staking, how you can put them together. Like, so do you use an oracle between the assets to weigh them? Do you have some sort of hard-coded balance there? Do you switch from one to another? Do you have trans slashing where one asset is slashed and the other one actually is slashed much less, but also receives less rewards? There are a lot of experiments that can happen there on the network basis to kind of create the outcome that they want. I think a lot of times people want to also, again, going back to like sort of their own token and utility for their own token, probably you want to reward your own stakers more, probably also have them take on more risks because they're already like self-selected like supporters of your project, but maybe the restakers are more the junior tranche that's kind of like low risk and just receives a bit less rewards. So I guess I'm excited to see these play out within the networks themselves, and then um, what will come of it. So yeah,
Nice.
we're early, and yeah, thanks for having this super exciting conversation, and hope to come back here at some point and also like talk more with you guys in general.
Yeah, for sure,
And
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and
I,
Felix, I think. Oh, Ethan, go ahead.
when you were talking, I can't resist but to ask like Lido V3 is coming out soon, and I noticed Mellow is like the design principle of Lido V3, Mellow, and Symbiotic. It's all about like in my view like maximizing like expressivity, and I'm just wondering if there's any alpha about like Symbiotic cooking with Lido, cooking with Mellow, or anything you can release there, or maybe I'll just continue to be.
I I mean, yeah, I guess it's Lido is very cautious on these restaking things, and I guess Lido as a protocol is generally very risk averse, which is also why there's no like direct thing with Symbiotic or anything. But it's like V3, I guess, is sort of a, from my perspective, right, attempt to allow Lido to do a bit more in these directions of these experiments, and expose like maybe adequate amounts of stake to this sort of things. So like vaults kind of make that possible by giving the ability to the people that deposit in these V3 vaults, and then I think you can, um, the way I understand it, right, like you have to put up extra bonds. So if something goes wrong, Lido wouldn't be affected, but basically those they would be slashed from that. So I guess there's always this sort of um, yeah, balance you have to have there, especially as someone like Lido that controls so much of the stake and like so
Mhm.
much rides on it. But you don't want to like expose, because otherwise you're just losing market share and people think you're not doing anything. So I think like the Lido V3 architecture is very exciting and very interesting in that regard, and really excited to see what will come out of that. I guess that's,
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see sort of Lido at least, on a, risk and reward balance or scale, taking this kind of like small nudge towards, what all of us are working towards or working for, which is, in itself already a big enough alpha that, some people paying attention will eventually realize. Um, yeah, extremely happy to have you here, Felix. I think it's a really sort of information packed discussion. And before we close off, I want to give you an opportunity to share to our audience and our community what is the best way for people who are interested in Symbiotic to reach out to you guys, or where should they go? What should they do to get involved with Symbiotic?
yeah, thanks Liam, and yeah, thanks Ethan, first of all. Again, really cool conversation. Yeah, we can generally we have now also Discord, like since we are on mainnet, there is like public Discord that people can join and ask questions about Symbiotic and get involved on the like very community level. If you're trying to build something, we're very reachable also on Telegram and the channels that you mentioned earlier, and my handle. And also we have a contact form on the website just to like get in touch. You can kind of describe what your role is. Are you a vault? Do you want to build a vault? Do you want to be just an operator? do you want to build a network? We have like sort of separate streams for these key roles, and yeah, I think that's that. We're gonna be at a bunch of
Perfect.
conferences. We're on the ground building, and like yeah,
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much,
all that good
everyone,
stuff.
and we'll see you again soon. You can reach out to Felix on X at FelixLTS, and yeah, thank you, Felix, for joining us today.
Thank you
Thank you.
guys for hosting. Great.
Yeah.